Okay, so, ready to dive into another one.
Always. What do we got today?
Well, today we're looking into what many call Canada's best documented UFO case, the Falcon Lake Incident.
Ah, yes, Falcon Lake. I've heard that some even go so far as to call it the world's most documented sighting.
Right. Big claims. And we've got a pretty hefty stack of sources to dig through on this one.
Excellent. Should be interesting to see what makes this one so special.
Yeah, let's jump right in. I guess the place to start is with the man at the center of it all, Steve Michalak.
Yeah, he wasn't just some random guy who happened to see something strange in the sky.
Not at all. He was an industrial mechanic by trade, but he was also a pretty serious amateur geologist.
Interesting. That's definitely relevant when you think about where this all happened.
Oh, absolutely. See, Michalak actually had a staked claim in the Falcon Lake area of Manitoba, so this wasn't some random weekend outing for him.
You're there for a reason.
Exactly. It was the long weekend in May 1967, and he was out there prospecting looking for quartz and silver,
So he knew the area.
like the back of his hand. He was familiar with the Canadian Shield geology, knew where those mineral deposits were likely to be, so he's out there doing his thing.
And then I'm guessing things took a turn for the unexpected.
You could say that. So Michalak's out there, totally focused on his prospecting, when suddenly he's startled by this huge commotion.
Commotion. Like what?
A flock of geese. But we're not talking about your average, everyday geese here.
Right.
These birds were totally freaking out, acting super agitated, like something had spooked them. Bad.
Okay, so that gets his attention. Then what?
Well, he looks up, and there, hovering about 150 feet away, are these two reddish glowing objects.
Wow, okay. That's vivid.
Right. He described them as cigarette-shaped things with humps in the middle.
Cigarette-shaped things with humps in the middle.
Well,
That's descriptive. I'll give him that.
it is, isn't it? And, his first thought, logically enough, was experimental aircraft.
Yeah, I mean, this was the Cold War era. Seeing some weird new flying machine wouldn't have been totally out there.
Exactly. But then one of these objects just shoots straight up and zooms off at an incredible speed.
Okay, starting to get a little less conventional now. What about the other object?
That one starts to descend slowly.
Uh,
And eventually it lands on this rocky platform nearby.
it landed.
It landed, and here's where it gets really interesting. As it touches down, the object changes shape. It becomes more like a disc.
Like a classic flying saucer shape.
Exactly. And get this, Michalak then spends the next half hour just sitting there, observing this thing.
Wow. A half hour. That's a long time to just, hang out with a landed UFO.
It is. And he doesn't just sit there gawking. He actually pulls out his notebook and starts sketching what he sees.
Seriously, he's sketching this thing.
Sketching away in detail, which, is one of the big reasons this case is considered so well documented. It's not just a fleeting glimpse. He's there, taking it all in, recording it.
I can see why people would find that compelling. A detailed sketch adds a level of, legitimacy to the whole thing. Plus, it wasn't just a visual thing for him either, right? Didn't he describe sounds, even smells?
That's right. He described this strong smell of sulfur, a definite warmth radiating from the craft, this whirring motor sound, and a hissing, like air being expelled. He was really taking in the whole experience.
Multisensory. It's like he wanted to record every single detail.
Yeah.
And that does make it harder to just dismiss as, an overactive imagination. All right, so he's got his sketches. What happens next?
Well, after a while, Michalak decides to approach the craft. He wants to see if he can find any kind of marking on it, an insignia, anything that might tell him where it came from.
And did he find anything?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. He described the surface as completely seamless, all metallic, but smooth, almost like colored glass.
Smooth and seamless, huh? You see that a lot in these kinds of reports. No rivets, no seams, nothing that looks like conventional construction.
Yeah, it's weird, right?
And the colored glass thing, that's definitely unusual. So how big was this thing anyway?
He estimated it to be about 34 feet long and 15 feet high.
Okay, that's pretty big. Not just some little drone.
No, this was substantial. And the color wasn't static either. He said it shifted between shades of gray and red. He described it as looking like hot stainless steel with this sort of golden glow coming off it.
That image is wild. Hot stainless steel with a golden glow. So what does he do next? Just stand there staring at this glowing metal thing?
Well, no. At some point, he notices this opening on the side of the craft, like a doorway or a hatch. And it's open.
Open.
Open. And there's this bright light pouring out from inside. And he can hear voices.
Voices? What kind of voices? Like alien voices?
No, he said they sounded human. Muffled, but definitely human. and he thought he could make out at least two distinct voices.
So what does he do? Try to talk to them.
He does. He calls out in English. He figures maybe these are American pilots or something. Maybe they need help. He even offers to lend a hand with his mechanical skills. He shouts, "Yankee boys? Are you in trouble? Can I help?"
Yankee boys. That's optimistic.
Maybe a bit naive in hindsight. And what's really strange is he says that as soon as he shouts that out in English, the voices just stop.
Huh. That's spooky. Like they heard him. So, no answer then.
Nothing. He tries a few other languages too. Polish, his native tongue, then Russian, even German, but still total silence.
But he keeps going closer. That's pretty brave, or maybe foolish.
I guess a little of both. But he's curious, right? He wants to see what's inside. So he puts on his welding goggles for protection.
Smart move, I guess, with all that bright light. What does he see?
Well, he says that looking through the goggles, he could see beams of light inside and panels flashing with different colors. But the interior seemed empty. No one in sight.
Huh. So, no little green men waving back at him.
Nope. But as he starts to back away from the craft, he claims that 3 panels suddenly slide shut, sealing the opening completely.
Like it was closing up shop, getting ready to leave.
Exactly. And then, almost without thinking, he reaches out and touches the side of the object. And the fingertips of his gloves just melt.
Melt. Like instantly.
Instantly. Which, tells you just how hot that surface must have been. And that's when things really go south for him.
Oh no, what happens?
The craft starts to rotate counterclockwise. And as it turns, he sees this panel on the side, and it's covered with this grid of small holes.
Holes, like ventilation or something.
Maybe. We don't know. But suddenly, from this panel comes this blast of incredibly hot gas.
Like an engine blast.
It hits him right in the chest, in the stomach, knocks him backwards, and his clothes catch fire.
Oh my God, that's awful.
Yeah, it was bad. Luckily, he has the presence of mind to tear off his burning clothes. That probably saved him from even worse burns.
I can't even imagine. What did he do after that?
Well, understandably, he's in a lot of pain, totally disoriented. He starts vomiting, but he somehow manages to start making his way back to his motel.
The Falcon Motor Hotel.
That's the one. And on the way back, he bumps into an RCMP constable, a guy named G.A. Solotki. And this interaction is pretty interesting.
Why? What happened?
Well, Solotki, seeing Michalak in this state, figures he's just drunk, though he notes in his report that he didn't smell any alcohol on him.
So, maybe not drunk, but definitely not doing well.
No. Solotki offers to take him to Falcon Beach to get some help, but Michalak refuses. He feels like the constable isn't taking him seriously, and he's probably right. Solotki's report does confirm the encounter, but he basically writes it off as some drunk guy who doesn't want to cooperate.
Yeah, I see the problem. Right from the start, no one's believing him. That's got to be frustrating.
Totally. But anyway, Michalak makes it back to the motel on his own. He talks to the owner about needing a doctor, but the local doctor is unavailable, so he rests up for a bit and then calls his wife Maria back in Winnipeg.
Does he tell her what happened?
He just tells her he was in an accident, doesn't go into details. He takes a Greyhound bus back to Winnipeg, and as soon as he gets home, he goes straight to the Misericordia Health Center. They admit him to the emergency room because of the burns.
That's good. He's getting medical attention. But what about the burns themselves? Were they,
Yeah.
Did they look like normal burns?
Well, that's the thing. The doctors note this really distinct grid-like pattern of raised, blistered sores on his chest and stomach.
Grid-like, hold on, like that panel he described.
Exactly. It matches his description of the blast from that hold panel on the object.
Whoa, that's hard to explain away.
Right.
What else?
The burns weren't the end of it. He continued to have all these awful symptoms for a long time. Diarrhea, headaches, blackouts. He even lost a lot of weight.
Sounds like he was really sick. Poor guy.
He was. He even went to the Mayo Clinic, hoping they could figure out what was wrong with him.
Did they?
Not really, but there was one important thing that came out of the Mayo Clinic visit. Their reports stated that he was mentally sound.
Okay, that's huge, because if he was making this whole thing up, you'd think there'd be some signs of mental instability, right?
Exactly. But the Mayo Clinic found no evidence of that.
So what did they think was causing all these problems?
Well, at first, some folks thought it might be radiation poisoning. That would make sense if he'd encountered some advanced, unknown technology, right?
Makes sense. So did they test him for radiation?
They did. They sent him to the Atomic Energy of Canada facility in Pinoa, and the test came back negative. No significant levels of radiation.
So not radiation. But he's still clearly very sick.
Yeah.
What else did they find?
Well, he kept losing weight, and his lymphocyte count was way too low. Lymphocytes are those white blood cells that help your immune system fight off infections.
Right. So a low count means his immune system was really compromised.
Exactly. And on top of that, those burn marks, they kept reappearing. He never fully recovered from the effects of whatever happened to him.
Tragic.
It is. And, in the aftermath of this whole ordeal, Michalak decided to tell his story. He actually published a piece called I Was Burned by UFO and later wrote a whole manuscript about the experience.
He put it all out there. So I guess he was convinced it was a UFO then.
Well, that's the interesting part. Even though he went public with this wild story, he always maintained that he thought it was some kind of experimental aircraft, maybe American. He never said outright that it was aliens.
Huh. So convinced it was a real thing, but not necessarily extraterrestrial.
Interesting. Yeah, he held onto that belief until he passed away in 1999.
Sad. And I imagine that going public with this story didn't exactly make his life easier.
You're right. He actually said he came to regret it because of all the media attention. It really messed things up for him and his family.
The media can be brutal.
They can. And it wasn't just the media. His wife, Maria, really struggled with the whole thing. And their son, Stan, was bullied at school.
Oh, man, that's terrible. Imagine having to deal with that on top of everything else.
Awful. Maria avoided talking about it publicly, but their son, Stan, well, he's been really active in trying to keep his father's story alive. He's done a lot of research and speaks about it quite a bit.
That's kind of heartwarming. Like he wants to honor his father's experience.
I think so. It shows that these events, they don't just fade away. They have real and lasting effects on people's lives.
Absolutely. So this Falcon Lake thing, it's not just a footnote in UFO history, is it? I mean, I remember it being featured on Unsolved Mysteries.
Oh, yeah, it was a big deal on Unsolved Mysteries. And it's been in other places, too. The Canadian musician Jim Bryson, he even made a whole album about it with the Weaker Things. They called it the Falcon Lake Incident.
Really? A whole album? Okay, that's pretty cool.
There's even a film, Rulers of Darkness, that took some inspiration from the event, though they took some creative liberties with the details, obviously.
Sure. But it just shows you how this one event has really captured people's imaginations.
It really has, and it's still going strong. On the 50th anniversary of the incident, Stan Michalak and Chris Rutkowski, the ufologist, they published a book called When They Appeared, Falcon Lake, 1967, The Inside Story of a Close Encounter.
So they basically compiled everything, tried to get to the bottom of it. What did they find?
Well, they gathered eyewitness accounts, went over the evidence again. There have actually been a bunch of books written about Michalak's experience over the years. People are still trying to figure this thing out.
That's pretty wild 50 years later, and it's still a hot topic.
Yeah.
Anything else noteworthy happened on the anniversary?
Oh, get this. In 2018, to mark the event, the Royal Canadian Mint issued a special commemorative coin.
A commemorative coin? Seriously? What, like a loonie with an alien on it?
Not quite. It was a $20 silver coin, part of their Canada's Unexplained Phenomena series.
Okay, that's pretty official recognition for something, so... Well, unexplained.
Right. And they went all out. It even has glow-in-the-dark elements supposed to represent the beams of light Michalak described seeing.
Wow. They really committed to the theme. So how much did this glowing UFO coin cost?
It was a limited edition, only 4,000 minted, and it originally sold for around 130 Canadian dollars. Not cheap. But I guess it shows how much the story has become part of Canadian lore.
It's more than just a fringe thing, then. It's part of the national story.
I think so. And to make sure the story stays accessible, in 2019, a whole bunch of documents related to the case were donated to the University of Manitoba Archives. They even donated some of the clothes Michalak was wearing when it happened.
Wow. Primary source material. That's gold for any researcher who wants to dig into this.
Absolutely. Oh, and just to bring it full circle, Michalak's grandson, he actually inherited the land where the incident happened.
No way. What's he doing with it? Building a theme park? Not quite. But he does offer UFO tours of the site. Takes people out there, tells them the story.
That's amazing. A UFO tourism spot. Who would have thought?
It's a testament to the enduring power of this story. People are still drawn to it, wanting to see the place for themselves. Totally. So, all this attention, it must have caught the eye of the authorities, right? What did they make of it all?
Oh, they definitely got involved. Michalak's report triggered a whole bunch of inquiries. The RCMP, the Royal Canadian Air Force, the Department of Health, the Department of National Defense.
Oh, everyone's jumping in on this.
Even the Americans got involved. Organizations like the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, APRO, and even the U.S. Air Force as part of their Condon Committee. You remember them?
Condon Committee. Vaguely. Refresh my memory.
They were a group funded by the U.S. Air Force back in the late 60s, specifically to investigate UFO sightings. They were involved in a lot of high-profile cases.
Right, right. So even the Americans wanted a piece of the Falcon Lake puzzle.
They did. But initially, there was a lot of skepticism, like we talked about with that RCMP constable. They figured Michalak was probably just drunk or hallucinating.
Not the most open-minded approach.
No. But as the investigation went on and word got out about his injuries, things changed. They started taking it more seriously. They sent out helicopters, searching the area.
So it did escalate then.
Mhm.
And what about Michalak? Was he able to help with the search?
Not at first. He was too sick. But ultimately, all those investigations from the USAF, the RCMP, the Canadian Armed Forces, they all came up empty. Inconclusive.
Inconclusive, huh?
Uh,
So they couldn't explain it away,
yeah.
but they also couldn't confirm anything.
Exactly. And it's worth noting that the RCMP report specifically mentions that they couldn't explain Michalak's injuries, the burns, or that weird circular area of burn vegetation they found where he said the object landed.
Right. That burn circle is a big one. Hard to ignore that kind of physical evidence.
Absolutely. And that's another reason this case stands out. We're not just talking about word of mouth here. There are official reports, medical records. It's all documented. That's what gives it that best documented label.
So where can people find all these documents?
Lots of places. You've got detailed RCMP and RCAF reports in the Canadian National Archives. There's the USAF file on the incident. Even correspondence from the Mayo Clinic about Michalak's medical assessments.
Wow. So anyone who's really interested can go and read the actual reports.
That's the beauty of it. It's not hidden away. And when you look at the site analysis, it gets even more intriguing.
How so?
Remember that burn circle? Well, it was a perfect circle, 15 feet across, right where Michalak said the craft was.
I remember. Hard to miss that. What else did they find?
Well, this is where it gets strange. They found traces of highly radioactive elements in the soil samples taken from that circle and on pieces of Michalak's clothes.
Radioactive.
Radioactive, and there's more. They found these little bits of melted metal, like something had dripped into cracks in the rock, and guess what? Those were radioactive too.
Okay, that's starting to sound pretty sci-fi. Melted metal, radiation.
Yeah.
Almost like something really high-tech was there.
Right. It's hard to explain away. But of course, there are skeptical explanations out there too. We have to be fair.
Okay, lay it on me. What did the skeptics say?
Well, some of them think that maybe Michalak's burns were from some kind of accident, maybe involving alcohol, and that he made up the UFO story to cover it up.
A cover story. But why go to all that trouble?
Some folks suggest he might have been trying to scare off other prospectors from his claim, stay away, this place is haunted by UFOs kind of thing.
Uh-huh. Clever, but risky. Backfires if anyone actually believes him and comes looking for aliens.
Exactly. Others have suggested that maybe those radioactive bits of metal were planted just to make the whole thing seem more credible.
Intriguing. So they think it was all a hoax.
Some do, and they do have some points. For example, there are inconsistencies in Michalak's story, especially about what happened after the encounter.
Like what?
Well, his story about his run-in with Constable Salatki, the RCMP officer, it doesn't quite line up with Salatki's report.
Different versions of the same event.
Yeah.
That's not uncommon, though, is it? Memory can be unreliable, especially after a traumatic experience.
True, but there's also the issue of alcohol. Michalak insisted he hadn't had a drink that weekend, but the bartender at the Falcon Lake Hotel said he'd had several beers the night before the incident.
Ah, so there's conflicting information about whether he'd been drinking, and if he had, well, that would certainly fuel the skeptics' arguments.
Definitely. Plus, Salatki's report mentions that Michalak was hesitant to answer questions and that he, Salatki, suspected Michalak might have been under the influence.
Not a good look.
No. There's a guy, Aaron Sekulich, who writes under the name Iron Skeptic, and he's pretty convinced that alcohol played a big role in the whole thing. He thinks it explains a lot of what happened.
You think? So is that it then? Case closed. Just a drunk guy having a wild night.
Well, not so fast. There are still some things that are hard to explain away.
Oh, like what?
John B. Alexander, he's a pretty respected guy in the field. He wrote in the Journal for Scientific Exploration that it's really hard to just dismiss Michalak's long-term health problems. Even if some details of his story are shaky, those burns and the years of illness that followed, that's hard to fake.
Yeah, that's true. Even if you embellished some details, the physical effects were real. And specific, like that grid pattern. Hard to imagine that being self-inflicted.
Exactly. So even with the inconsistencies, there's still something there that needs explaining.
Right. It's more than just a simple open and shut case.
Hmm?
And what about the radiation? Any more on that?
Yeah, I should clarify something about that. Initially, those reports of high radioactivity were a big deal, but it turns out there's a natural radium vein near the site.
A naturally occurring source of radiation.
Exactly. And that actually explains the readings they got. It could have contaminated the soil and maybe even Michalak's clothes just through natural means.
Okay, so that takes some of the mystery out of it, but it doesn't explain everything, right?
Right. So let's recap. We have Michalak's story, his claims of this encounter, his burns, and the years of illness he suffered afterwards. We've got the physical evidence from the site, the burn circle, the weird metal fragments, and then we have those inconclusive official investigations.
Right, and we can't forget those inconsistencies in Michalak's account, the questions about alcohol, his memory of the events.
All of it adds up to a pretty compelling mystery, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's a fascinating puzzle, even if some of the pieces don't quite fit. Canada's best documented UFO case, and still no definitive answers.
It just goes to show you sometimes the most well-documented cases are the most perplexing.
They really are. So for everyone listening, I guess it's up to you to decide. What do you make of all this? What do you think happened at Falcon Lake?
Exactly. We've given you the facts, the evidence, the different perspectives. Now it's your turn to be the investigator. Weigh the evidence and draw your own conclusions. And, maybe that's the point of all this. Maybe the real mystery isn't what happened at Falcon Lake, but why we're still so fascinated by these unexplained events.
Good point. The human desire to make sense of the unknown, that's a powerful force. And sometimes, maybe, the not knowing is what keeps us coming back.
Well said. Thanks for diving into this with me. It's been a wild ride.
Anytime. Until the next mystery, Rob.
Until the next mystery.